Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 45 of SoftPro Saved You a Seat. Today, we will be showing you tips and tricks for your SoftPro Standard and Enterprise software that you may not have known. We are joined today by Rhonda Webb, SoftPro's training and project lead, who will run through all of the tips and tricks for you today. And as usual, we will be recording today's episode and we'll make it available on our SoftPro blog in the next day or so. So you can view today's recording later if you want to view any of the information that we're presenting today again, or if you have colleagues who want to view it who aren't able to join us live today. We're excited to show you all these tips and tricks for your software. And so I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Rhonda.
Hey, good morning, everyone, and welcome. So yeah, today we're going to go over some tips and tricks for both standard and enterprise. We're going to kind of look at what affects both the versions, regardless of which one you're working on. And then I'm going to specify some tips and other information that may be more geared toward those users on the standard version, because it does work just a little bit different in some areas than enterprise does. So I'm going to flip my screen out with you guys here so you can see, and we're going to jump in and get started. So I have open here the enterprise version of SoftPro. And one way for you guys to be able to tell which version you're operating on, because sometimes we do get that question, well, I'm not sure, am I standard or am I enterprise? You can always see in the very upper left-hand corner, it'll show which version you're running. And also, if you go to the Help menu heading drop down and go to About SoftPro Proform, it also will identify for you which version of the software you're operating under. And so we know that we're in that enterprise version. So what are some cool tips and tricks? Well, let's talk first a little bit about our keyboard shortcuts, right? Those are very convenient to use as we're going through and putting in the information to build our orders or our files for each of our individual transactions. So we have all of those function keys up at the top of the screen. So what do those function keys represent, and how can it help us as we're going through and inputting information? Well, first and foremost, if we start at the beginning, we have F1. F1 is our help site. When you click on F1, no matter where you are in the software, whether you're in an individual field or just sitting on a screen itself, it's going to open up to our web-based help site, in which you will have all of the capability to go out and view application resources, which gives you the capability to see things such as videos that we may have, webinars that we may have recorded and you guys have the capability to rewatch, as well as job aids that you can access at any time for more information on how certain information may work within your version of the software. Now next, we have F2. F2 is your undo button. We know when we input data into an order, it is always going to be red text. That means the user put it in there. If we need to remove that information, we're going to go in and we're going to use the F2 key. So F2 it to undo it. That's a biggie. Anytime you're dealing with red text in either version of the software, always use that F2 button so that it removes both seen and unseen information. Sometimes if you go in and just hit, hit the wrong button there. Sometimes if you go in and you just hit the delete button, it will either leave the field blank, or sometimes it may put zeros in the field and it will not populate any pre-populated information. So make sure that you always go in and F2 out any red text. Now, did you know that you had the capability within SoftPro to copy, cut, and paste? If you have information from an outside application, you have the capability to copy that information and paste it within any text field within the software. Now, when you are copying and pasting information, oops, wrong button there again. You do want to make sure that the information that you are posting or copying and pasting is actual text. Okay, so you want to copy and paste actual text. You can't do an image. So if you are utilizing those PDFs to have information sent to you, you can copy out of it as long as it is actual text and not the image. Now, within those fields, you can go in and you can also manually type in. You have a spell check capability. So if you type in information and hit F7, the F7 function key on your keyboard, it will actually run a spell check for you. And within there, you can go in, you can utilize a spell check and correct any misspelled words. You also have a control aspect called Control Z. Anytime you are dealing with a field that has a scroll bar associated with it, you have the capability to expand it, right? Sometimes when we put in those legal descriptions, or maybe we're dealing in title and we have a lengthy requirement or a lengthy exception, all of that information actually lives in a scrollable field. And with it being in a scrollable field, we have the capability to open it up, expand it, so we can see more of the individual information at one time. You can place your cursor anywhere within that field. And if you hit Control Z for like zoom, or as I like to say, zebra, because that's my favorite animal, you can hit Control Z and see how it opens the field up into a scrollable field editor. It will show you more of the information that is actually listed within that field. From here, you can modify, add to, whatever you need to. When you're done, you can click OK. F7 will still work to run a spell check, but when you do have a field expanded to your scrollable field editor, you do have a spell check option within the field itself. Okay, so we've got F1 to help, we've got F2 to undo, we've got F7 to run a spell check, and we have Control Z, which will open up those scrollable fields. What other fun stuff can we do within the system? Well, what if we wanted to see if there was a lookup table associated with a field? A couple of ways to know if there's a lookup table. If there is a lookup table, when you place your cursor in the field, if you look all the way to the bottom right-hand corner, you're going to go down to that status bar at the bottom. And notice we have a code here that says LKUP. Anytime you place your cursor in that field, and if it has that LKUP, that means there is a lookup table associated. So what is our shortcut key to access our lookup table? That's going to be F9. When I click on F9, it then accesses a lookup table that may have be already set within that individual field. And from there, we can click on any of those column headers to sort those items in our lookup table alphabetically, numerically, depending on which type of column we sort, and we can go in with a double click and we can pull in that information. You also can access a lookup table, and from that lookup table, you can also single click to highlight an option, and you can click Retrieve Entry to pull in the data from that lookup table. What if you wanted to copy information from a field within your ProForm and send it and put it in another application, like possibly a Word document? Well, when you are in your individual field, let's say I wanted to pull in a requirement or an exception, and I wanted to copy that information and place it actually in a Word or an Excel spreadsheet, or maybe just in an email. You can also single click and place your cursor in a field, and if you hit Control A, it will highlight the entire information. And notice what it also does. It will also put in the date, the time, and the user who wanted that information from that individual field. You can use it in a field such as this if you wanted to pull in that info. You can also use Control A out here on your general screen. Under General, if you have the Express Order Entry screen, you can access the Notes section. Or if you just have the File Number, Settlement Dates, and Notes screen, again, depending on the version of the software you are operating under, if you double click and open it up and you wanted to add a specific note to the file, any notes that you enter in any file are global to everyone who has access to the individual file. If you place your cursor in the field and hit Control A, notice how again it populates the date, the time, and the user. So it can indicate for you who is specifically adding the note, as well as who the user was who added it and the date and the time. So you can then enter any of your noted information. Only thing I do want to point out here for you guys is if you are utilizing the notes, keep in mind that notes are going to go in numerically. So if you're using the Control A, it's always going to be your oldest note at the top and then any newer notes at the bottom. And it too is a scrollable field, so that Control Z shortcut will work as well to open up that field editor. Even if you try to trick the system and maybe hit the enter key a few times and then try to go up and hit Control A, again, it's going to populate it down below. So it's always going to be oldest to newest. Okay. Now you have all of your copy, cut, and paste shortcut keys that you utilize in your Microsoft application. So you can go in and highlight information, and Control C will copy that information. Control V for Victor will paste that information. And if you just wanted to take it out completely, Control X will cut it out of that individual field. To save data within your order, you can use Control P, Control S, and that will save your information, and Control P will allow you to print information as well. So those are some of the shortcut keys that we can use, right? We can use our F1 function keys, we can use some control keys to help navigate and move around the system a little bit easier. So what other fun and exciting things can we do within the software to help moving around be a little easier? Well, we have the capability to utilize overlay. Overlay is this icon here in your toolbar that looks like cascading squares. Overlay allows you to take information from individual files you've already created and overlay that information into a new order. So a good example of utilizing overlay could be we handled a purchase a while back, and now we're doing a refinance of the same property. Well, we know that all those requirements and exceptions are the same, right? Because it's the same property. We have the capability to overlay that information from the old to the new without having to rekey it all or do a copy and paste. To overlay, we go in and we have the order open that we want to overlay information into. So we have the new order open. So if I go out and I open and create a new order, it creates the order. And then I want to overlay information into that new order. So I click on the overlay icon. It opens up to my server where SoftPro lives on your individual server, And if you go to data, you want to look to the bottom right-hand corner and you want to view your ProForm files. When you view, here are all of your actual orders or files, all of that data. You can go in, and if you know your file number, you can begin typing it in and it will filter to that individual file. You can click to add it to the file name and then click open. Now, when you click open, you may receive an overlay tab selection window. What that does is it gives you the capability to go in and determine which of these tabs you actually want to overlay. If all you want to overlay is just what lived within the title insurance tab, you can uncheck any of those other options. Keep in mind that when it overlays a tab, it overlays information for the entire tab. So you will have to go in and maybe remove some information that applied to the original transaction that may not apply to this transaction. And you would click OK. When you do and go to that title insurance tab, any information that had been in that original order would automatically pull through. So you have now overlaid information from one order to another. Now you can also utilize overlay instead of doing an actual file, is you can have different types of templates created. Maybe you are in a very heavily driven subdivision area and you want to have individual subdivision templates so that, again, from an efficiency standpoint, I don't have to fill in 25 different exceptions that always apply to an individual subdivision each time I do a transaction that is within that subdivision. So that being the case, you could do the same, but instead of searching for data, when you click the overlay icon, if you then search the actual server, you're going to have a folder called templates. And within that template, you may have an individual subdivision template that you can then copy and overlay the information into your actual order. If you go to overlay information and you do not see that overlay window that popped up when I chose my order, so notice here this tab selection. If this does not pop up, this is a setting that if you are an enterprise user is set within SP admin. So it is an admin setting that whoever has admin rights can set for you. And if you are a standard user, it actually can be set in your individual ProForm. If you do not have the tab selection field, guys, and you opt to overlay, it is going to automatically overlay each individual tab. So any information that you have in that destination source order that you're pulling information out of is going to automatically go and be populated into your destination order. How you can check to see if that tab selection window is viewable to you is under Tools. If you go to your Tools menu heading drop down and you go all the way to the bottom to Preferences. If you click on Preferences, notice here in the Miscellaneous section, if you have the Overlay tab selection box checked, that means you will see that tab selection when you go to Overlay. If it is unchecked, it will automatically populate in every single tab. So you can go into SP Admin and set that setting. All right, guys, so we can overlay. We can overlay orders or files from one to the other. We can overlay certain templates based off of how our transactions are being handled and what type of templates we may have created specifically for certain transactions. Now, did you know in your CDF tab or your HUD tab, either one, depending on which type of transaction you have chosen, you have both a grouped disbursements and a flex check section. So what do these actually do? Well, as we know, when we enter charges onto our statements, whether it's a CD-based statement or a HUD-based statement, and we enter a charge, a DS code will populate. DS stands for disbursement status. So how are we anticipating these funds being dispersed? We do know that certain contacts that we enter on that general contact screen may have an individual DS code. Notice here, I have a B pulled in for my mortgage broker, I have an A pulled in for my settlement agent, and I have a G that populates for my government entity. These are all contacts that can be actually entered under that general tab. If you click in a DS field and you click on the drop down, at the very top, it identifies all of the individual contacts who may have their own individual DS code. We have one for the lender. We have one for any charges the lender is going to deduct. We have the mortgage broker, the settlement agent, the underwriter, etc. If we need to enter a charge that is not affected by any of those codes, then we have S for a separate check. Well, this is where group disbursements and flex checks start coming into play. What a group disbursement screen does is any charges that we enter that are payable to the same individual contact or DS code outside of the S automatically get grouped together into a single check. So for an example, we have two different charges going to that government contact. If we close out of this screen and look to group disbursements, we can see where it has now grouped in our government as that G contact and created one disbursement check for both charges. So any of those individual DS codes that are associated with multiple charge lines, it groups those charges together. What happens though if we need to separate it? Now, if we're a standard user, we can just separate it in actual ProTrust when we get ready to cut the check. If we're an enterprise user, though, we can't do that. And even if we are a standard user, we don't have to manipulate it in ProTrust. We can actually ungroup it right here. You have the capability of changing those DS codes. Let's say here for our mortgage broker, the mortgage broker is receiving a check for multiple transactions. They're getting a comp fee from the lender, they're getting an underwriting fee, and they're getting a credit report fee. The mortgage broker has called you up and says, "Hey, Rhonda, I want a check for the $1,000 to be separated out, and I need another check for the balance to me." I can go in and I can go to my group disbursement screen, and instead of having one separate check for the total amount, I can click the DS status. And when I do, I can now make this charge a flex check. Flex checks give you the capability to ungroup grouped together fees. If I make it a flex check and change it to flex check number 1, If I close out of the screen and I look to the Flex Check section, I can see where it pushed over that full disbursement. This is where I can break it up. Within your Flex Check section, you're going to see a plus minus field to the far right. If I need to deduct funds from this to create it as a separate transaction, I'm going to go into the plus minus field and I'm going to lead off with a negative because I want to deduct. And I'm going to deduct the $1,000 broker fee to make it a separate transaction. When I tab out of the field, notice now the check is only for $204. If I look to my status bar in the bottom left-hand corner, which always shows me what's coming from the buyer, what's anticipated to the seller, and if my order or file is balanced, I can see it put me out of balance by that $1,000. I now want to manually create as Flex Check number 2 the $1,000 disbursement. I choose my disbursement status code. It is a separate check. I'm going to type in who it is payable to. Now, we just talked about those shortcut keys, right? So we can copy and paste. So I can highlight that to field because it's going to the same entity and Control C to copy. And I can place my cursor in that to field and Control V to paste it. If I wanted to indicate in the memo line what it is for, I can indicate what the $1,000 is for. And then in that plus minus field for Flex Check number 2, I'm going to enter the $1,000. Now I am dispersing the full $1,204 to that mortgage broker as 2 separate checks. And notice now my order is balanced in my status bar. So Flex Checks give you the capability to ungroup charges that have been grouped together via the grouped disbursement screen. Well, what if I've entered 2 charges that were going to the same company? I wanted to make 1 transaction, but this company did not have individual DS codes. They are both S for separate. Well, you also can utilize Flex Checks to group charges together. If I navigate to CDF page 2 and I go to the bottom into section H, notice here I have 2 different charges for a survey. I have a charge for the actual survey that is payable to post surveying, as well as an update they had to do that is also an additional charge to post surveying. As it stands now, I'm creating 2 separate disbursement checks for those amounts. I need to send 1 lump check to them for the full $675. To do that, I can identify the DS code as Flex Checks for those 2 charge transactions. I can go into the field with my cursor, click the drop down, and I can choose the Flex Check I want to associate it with. Now keep in mind, guys, we just ungrouped the mortgage broker's check. So I've already utilized check 1 and check 2. So now I'm going to go down to check number 3, and I'm going to make that survey Flex Check 3. Notice it changes the DS code, guys, but it does not modify anything in the to field. So your statements are still correct. I'm then going into the survey update, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to click in the DS field, and from the drop down, I'm choosing the same flex check option. When I want to group those charges together, I'm going to choose the same field, the same check number. Now, if I close out of CDF page 2 and go back to my flex checks, I can see where it grouped those two charges together into one transaction. So flex checks give you that flexibility, guys, for you to ungroup, group disbursements, as well as group together disbursements you want to group together. This information is also reflected if you have utilized flex checks on your order balance sheet or your file balance sheet. When you are balancing your file in your Ready Docs, which are in every single order you create, Ready Docs are SoftPro generated and maintained documents. You have the capability under the SoftPro documents, under escrow and closing, to go and find your file balance sheet, whether you're generating a CD or a HUD. If I double click on that hyperlink to view my file balance sheet, notice if I were to scroll down, I'm going to see where Coastal Funding Corp has a number 1 to the far left. That lets me know that I utilized a Flex Check 1 for that charge. And if I continue to scroll down, I can see where it is showing me Coastal Funding Corp as a group of the 204. If I navigate to the next page and move it on back up, I can see where it lets me know I made that flex check adjustment of $1,000, and here's that $1,000. It also shows me where I have now grouped together those two charges to one payee for the survey. So it will also be reflected on your individual file balance sheets. Now, everything I've done so far as utilizing group disbursements to choose a flex check number, as well as utilizing the flex check screen to ungroup disbursements that were grouped together and to also group individual charges together, is doable no matter which version of the software you're operating under. It's the same functionality, whether I am an enterprise user or whether I am a standard user. Where things are going to kind of change up a little is when I'm on the standard version, because in addition to what I've done with group disbursements and flex checks, I have a little bit more information that I can also identify in the order before I take it to ProTrust to do my dispersing. I'm going to navigate now into hold up, navigate now into the standard version of the software. And here in standard, if I go to my CDF tab and I look to my group disbursements, notice again, I have that capability to make it a flex check. I can take that flex check, and from the flex check screen, I can ungroup those fees into two separate transactions, one for the 1204, the other for the $1,000 broker fee. So I can ungroup them. I also can use the same functionality we did before by grouping charges together. So if I go to CDF page 2, and let's say I scroll down here to section H, I can make those charges payable to the same flex check line number so that they are now grouped together into one transaction. Where I can take it a step further when I am a standard user is not only can I utilize the DS column to identify charges that are payable to individual contacts who have their own DS code, or hold on, excuse me, guys, or by pulling in those flex checks to group them together, I can also make a couple of other identifying options. Let's say, for an example, that I know that my seller is going to want me to wire them this $145,000. Well, I can actually set it up in the order that this is going to be a wire transfer, so that when I export out to ProTrust to make my disbursements, it is already identified and posted as that miscellaneous transaction. If I go to my division of proceeds screen and double click, and I look at the proceeds going to my seller, it is set up as a separate check. The seller wants me to wire the funds. So from the drop down, I can now scroll to the bottom of the DS status and notice it gives me some additional options. I have the option to wire out. So I can choose wire out, and now it's going to be set up as a wire transfer within ProTrust to show it as a posted miscellaneous transaction. I can close out of the screen. I can do that for any charge I know is going to be wired. I go to CDF page 3, and I know that my payoff lender is going to require a wire of the payoff. Again, I just want to change that DS status from a separate check to a W for wire out. I can also determine that funds are going to be held before I export into ProTrust. If I have an escrow holdback and I'm going to be holding back a certain amount of money, it's going to automatically want to produce a check for that amount. I know that we're holding these funds until such time as we've been given the authority to disperse it. So from the DS field, I'm going to click the drop down, and if I scroll to the bottom of the screen, notice I have the option of held. I can then, when I export out into ProTrust, this check will be in the held status and not be part of the checks that are printed for disbursement. I also have the capability to determine if a transaction needs to be a funds transfer. If you are going to utilize, ledgers for things such as your revenue or your recording fees, you have the capability of, again, going to that grouped disbursements, and instead of producing a check to yourself out of the transaction for your revenue, you can set it up from the disbursement status field drop down at the bottom of the screen as a funds transfer, so that when you export into ProTrust, it will automatically require you to tell the software what ledger you want to transfer it to. Now, just like we saw back when we were looking at the enterprise version, we have access, right, to that file balance sheet. If I open up my SoftPro Ready Docs and I go into my CDF documents to my file balance sheet, notice that not only now does it reflect those flex check transactions, but notice I have certain transactions that have W beside them. I know that those fees are going to be wired. I have one with an H. I know that that's my escrow holdback. It's going to be held. If I continue to scroll down, notice that my revenue here has a dash in the front. I know that's going to be a funds transfer out. So I can view all of that information from my file balance sheet. Now, as we know, when we are posting funds, any charges outside of the loan funding amount, or excuse me, any anticipated receipts in excess of our loan funding amount is automatically going to be grouped together into one deposit amount. So for an example, if in this individual transaction, in addition to the money the buyer needs to bring to the closing, maybe their parents gave them some gift funds, we can go in and enter the amount of those gift funds. And if I go in and indicate that this is going to be an incoming fund, what it's going to do, let's say it's 10,000, is it's going to add that $10,000 into the amount the buyer needs to bring to close. So we have the 10,000, we have the 87,218. When we export, it's going to show one deposit for 97,218.28. Now, some of you may also have your loan funding amount incorporated in that deposit. And then when you get into ProTrust, you have to separate out the loan amount, separate out the gift funds. Well, as far as the gift funds and the buyer funds to close, those will always be grouped together. You will always have to separate them in ProTrust. However, there is a checkbox you can check within ProForm that automatically separates the loan funding amount out as a separate deposit. If I close out of my ReadyDoc and go into my General tab, in my General tab under my Loan, Funding, and ProTrust screen, there is a checkbox that says Separate ProTrust Deposit. If this box is checked, when we export into ProTrust, it's going to show one deposit for the loan funding amount and a second deposit for the total of the 97,218, which is going to be the buyer funds to close plus the gift funds from the parents. You can set it up to create those lender funds as a separate deposit. You also have a funding type option where you can identify if it's net versus gross. Now, your template may be defaulted to say gross. What gross means is when it is marked is that any charges that we have entered that are payable to the lender contact are going to be cut out as a check. It now changed, and notice the disbursement status is automatically an L. If I go to my grouped disbursement screen, I can see where it has now created a check to the lender for those fees. The lender is net funding. So instead of you having to go to each DS status code field and change it to D for deducted, on that General tab, in the Loan, Funding, and ProTrust, you have the capability of choosing net so that it automatically goes in and puts D for deducted on those charges that it knows are lender charges. Some of them, such as anything in Section B, you will have to manually put in D for deducted, but for all others, it will automatically mark it as deducted. And then last but not least here, you also have the capability to show if the buyer brought too much money to the closing. If the buyer is needing to bring 87,218.28, but they just bring you a straight or give you a straight $88,000 wire or $88,000 check. If I put in $88,000 to identify how much they actually provided, what will happen when I export out to ProTrust is it will automatically go in and produce the excess funds check back to the buyer. So if I now save my order and I go to File, Export, Export to ProTrust, and click OK. Well, hold up. Let me fill in my payee here. Go to File, Export, Export to ProTrust, and say OK. Now notice the first thing it wants to do is it wants to do my ledger funds transfer. So here I want to transfer that revenue into my revenue ledger so I can put in the ledger ID, which is the name of the ledger, and click OK. And now if I look into my ProTrust register, here it separated out my loan funds as a separate deposit. It is showing my payoff, my seller funds as posted as wires. So we know that we're going to now go through our banking system to wire those funds. And it shows our funds transfer for our revenue funds. And here is my held check. I was able to do all of that in the order before I exported so that now I don't have to do a whole lot of changing. The register within ProTrust is ready to go. I can also see if I scroll here that I have that pending check for the additional funds the buyer overpaid. Here is their excess funds to close of the $781. So the buyer brought too much, it automatically produced that check back. So those are some nifty tips and tricks that you guys can use when we are talking about making certain disbursements, things we can do in the order to make it easier and more efficient to disperse. Don't forget your F1 option. Remember, F1 gives you the capability to go in and access our help desk. So anytime you are in Proform and click F1, you have your application resources in which you can go into any of the individual modules, and it will be broken down into different components for you to review additional information. Does anybody have any questions for me?
Thank you so much, Rhonda. That was great information. It looks like we have one question that just came through right now, and that is there a way to convert a HUD into a CD?
So the only way to do that is what you're currently doing. We don't have an option within Proform to actually change the settlement type from a CD to a HUD. So you would utilize that overlay option. If this is a CD order that I want to convert to a HUD, I'm going to go first into General, and if I have the express order entry screen, again, depending on your version, I'm going to change the status to canceled, and I'm going to put in the reason in the status comment it was converted to a HUD, and then close out of that screen. I'm going to make note of my order number here, and then I'm going to close that order. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new order, make it a HUD settlement type. I'm going to add whatever required information I need as far as my order number is concerned. And again, it's not going to allow you to duplicate those order numbers. So if you wanted to make some sort of change to the order number, I know that it was order number 54, and mine will change because I've got HUD now at the back end instead of CD. But if you don't have a prefix or a suffix, you could put, you know, an X or an A or something to identify it as a separate order at the back end. And then what you can do is, instead of copying your normal HUD template, you could actually pull in the file and copy the file, or you could go in and you could copy it with your normal HUD template. It creates the order now as a HUD transaction. You now have HUD screens, and then you can overlay. Remember, overlay allows me to overlay from file to file. So from overlay, I can view my Proform files. I can choose order number 54, that was the CD order, and say open. And then I can, if my tab selection appears, determine which of these tabs I want to overlay. I can click to overlay everything and click OK. And now if I go into my fields here, because I'm utilizing this screen for my management company dues, it's telling me I have to assign it to a line. So this is the biggest thing when you change things from a HUD to a from a CD to a HUD or a HUD to a CD. The lines are not going to transfer, and that's simply because the line setup is different, right? It doesn't know that what I may have put in section H of a CD needs to go to the 1300 section of a HUD, or vice versa. So it may prompt you to change some information, but notice if I do look at my buyer and seller information, it has pulled that information through. So it's overlaid and copied. But you do want to go through each of your individual HUD screens to make sure. For an example, I put loan charges in, but no loan charges came across when I converted it to a HUD. If they still applied, I would have to re-enter, because it doesn't know that what I may have entered on the section A and B goes to 800 and so forth.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, and there are,
go ahead.
One more thing. There are guides on F1 that walk you through specifically how to convert from a HUD to a CD or a CD to a HUD. If you go to getting started, it's under creating orders and templates, how to reopen a CDF as a HUD1 and how to reopen a HUD1 as a CDF. So it does give you aids on how that process works as well.
Thanks, Rhonda. And then I know that you covered this toward the beginning of the webinar, but someone is asking if you can repeat what the Control V keyboard shortcut was for.
Sure. Control V as in Victor is to paste. So think of it just like your Microsoft shortcut keys. Control C copies, Control X cuts, Control V will paste it.
Perfect. Awesome. Those are actually all the questions that we have right now. So thank you so much, Rhonda, for going over all those tips and tricks. It was really great information. And just a reminder for everybody still on the line here, we will make this recording available on our blog. If you were registered for today's webinar, you'll receive an email once that recording is available. And just keep an eye out over the next couple of weeks for more information on our next episode, episode 46 of Saved You a Seat. We look forward to seeing you guys all on future episodes. So thank you, and hope everybody has a great rest of their week.
Bye.